Hello and welcome to English for You. I'm Seb.
I'm Nikki.
And we are still talking about The Boy on the Wooden Box, our literature article for this month. Okay, so where were we when we left last?
We were talking about this little boy, Leon Layson. And his whole family moved from one city to another.
Yes, things were going very well, but then the Nazis invaded Poland. This story is happening in the late 1930s. And so Leon and his family are Jewish and they are sent to a concentration camp. So we've looked at a lot of stories like this before at English for You, actually. You know, you might have read the Diary of Anne Frank, for example. That's also one which deals with Jewish people and how they were treated during the Holocaust. We'll get onto that word later in this unit. But in this story, something very different happens while they're in the concentration camp, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. Okay, so let's begin with today's part of the story.
Reading. The Boy on the Wooden Box. The concentration camp prisoners have to work day and night, often in German factories. So to Leon, it is unsurprising that he and his family are to work for a man called Oskar Schindler. He doesn't realize that he and his family have just been given their best chance of survival. Schindler is a Nazi, but secretly he doesn't agree with what his government is doing. As a result, he does his best to protect the Jews who work at his factory. His workers receive larger food portions than they do at the camp so that they don't starve. Schindler also doesn't allow Nazi soldiers into his factory, and this lets workers avoid them. As time goes by, the tide begins to turn against Germany. Soon, there is news that the Russian army has invaded Poland and the Nazis are retreating. Schindler frees his workers and gives every Jew some blue cloth to sell or make clothes. Leon and his family have suffered terribly over the years, but thanks to their employer, the impossible became possible.
Okay, so the story continues. The concentration camp prisoners have to work day and night, often in German factories.
课文一开始说到，这些被关在集中营的人呢，他们必须要日以继日的在德国工厂工作。Day and night 意思就是白天和晚上嘛，那所以它的意思就是说日夜不停的去做某件事情 ，something that you have to keep doing at all the time. And the article says, so to Leon, it is unsurprising that he and his family are to work for a man called Oskar Schindler.
Do you remember I was telling you, have you seen Schindler's List? Well, that's because this story kind of crosses into that movie. Now, before we talk more about Oskar Schindler, we need to talk about the grammar for today's article. It's surprising that.
所以我们说 it's surprising that or it's unsurprising that 用的是一个虚主词 it 来引导后面讲的事情，也就是说 that 后面接的东西。那意思就是说一件事情是 surprising 很令人惊讶的，或者是这边是 unsurprising 加了一个 prefix on 指的就是有否定或是相反的意思。所以 unsurprising 就是不意外的意思。那我们再看另一个用这个句型的例句。It's obvious that my brother is mad at me. He hasn't answered any of my texts.
So yeah, that does sound like he would be a bit angry at you. Okay, we continue with the story. So who is Oskar Schindler? Well, we are going to find out in a second, but Leon doesn't realize that he and his family have just been given their best chance of survival. Oh, I wonder why. Let's find out. Okay, so survival, is it a good thing or a bad thing? Well, we can see in this story that it is a good thing. That's because survival, that's a noun, is the act of making it through a situation in which you could die. So the chance of survival in the story is the chance that Leon and his family will manage to get out of the concentration camp. You'll hear people use survival a lot to talk about animals too, as in these example sentences. For their survival through the long winters, squirrels collect nuts through the summer and hide them in their nests. Here's another one. The polar bear's thick fur allows for its survival in the icy Arctic Circle.
Survival 在这里是名词，指的是幸存或是存活，甚至是生存的机会。所以我们可以用这个字来形容动物的生存机会，或者是课文这边指的就是这个小男孩和他的家人可以继续存活的机会。Survival 还可以用来当做形容词，意思就是生存的或是救生用的，像是我们都会有很强的求生意志 We have a strong survival instinct. And survivor 指的是生还者或者是幸存者，可能就是发生了一场意外，那大家都死光了，剩你还活着，那你就是一个 survivor.
Exactly.
And the article says Schindler is a Nazi, but secretly he doesn't agree with what his government is doing.
Okay, so he's against the government's treatment of people in the concentration camps. As a result, he does his best to protect the Jews who work at his factory.
于是呢，辛德勒他就是竭尽所能来保护这些在他的工厂工作的犹太人。When someone does his best, it means that he's trying as hard as he can to do something. 这就是全力以赴、竭尽所能的意思。And then his workers receive larger food portions than they do at the camp so that they don't starve.
Exactly. They receive larger portions. Now, when you receive something, it is given to you. The workers at Schindler's factory receive larger portions. They receive more food. That means that they get more food to eat. They are given the food. Receive is a lot like the verb get, although it's slightly more formal. We can use receive in any day-to-day situation, like this one. James received a prize for writing the best English essay in his class. There are lots of ways of talking about give and take in English. So some other useful words you can learn include donate. That's to give something to a charity or someone who really needs it. Or we could also talk about gifting someone. When you gift someone something, you give it to them as a present. Lastly, you could acquire something, which is where you get something for yourself, but it's normally like a new skill or an ability.
Receive 是动词，意思是接收或是得到。那在课文呢，这边就是讲的是这些工厂的工人得到获得食物。那我们还可以用来说是收信 I received your letter a few days ago. 或者是接到一通电话 I receive a call from my brother. 那它的名词是 receipt， 意思就是发票或者是收据。可能你今天需要报账给学校或是老板的时候，就会记得要跟店家要一张 receipt.
So let's go back to the sentence. What is it they're receiving? They're receiving larger portions. Now, a portion is an amount of something. Normally, we use this to talk about food. So if you are someone that likes to eat big portions, then you eat a lot. If you're someone that eats very little, then you eat small portions. This is important to the story. By giving the workers larger portions, Schindler helps them to survive. Now, talking about portions, we might also want to talk about other bits of things. So another word we could use is chunk, and that is normally a big piece of something, normally something that you've broken off, something larger. So for example, a chunk of bread or a chunk of cheese. We could also talk about a slice of something, which is a small thin piece of normally food that you cut off with a knife.
A slice of pie?
Like a slice of pie, exactly. Let's look at our example sentence. This restaurant is expensive and the portions are too small. Let's not go there. Okay, we also saw the word starve, and this is why it's important that the prisoners are getting larger portions. When you starve, you eat very little or nothing at all, so that you slowly die. The prisoners at the camps were starving because they didn't have enough food to eat. This was how many of them died. Unfortunately, people still starve today. Some people even starve themselves. When you starve yourself, you deliberately don't eat enough food so that you lose weight. However, this is very unhealthy, as we see in our example sentence. Starving yourself is very unhealthy and it can make you very sick. Starve is a serious word, as is starvation, the noun form, but sometimes we do use it in not so serious situations. So if I tell Nikki, I'm starving, let's go get something to eat, I'm not saying that I'm actually going to die. I'm just saying that I'm very hungry.
Starve 是动词，指的是挨饿或是饿死。课文这边提到集中营的囚犯们就是因为没有足够的食物可以吃，所以他们就挨饿，甚至是因为挨饿而死。那我们会说 starve to death， 意思就是饿死。那这样是像 Seb 老师刚刚说的，有时候我们也会用这个形容词 I'm starving 来夸饰说自己快要饿死了，但其实意思就是 I'm very hungry. And the article says Schindler also doesn't allow Nazi soldiers into his factory, and this lets workers to avoid them.
Exactly. So they are safer in his factory. They can't get beaten by the prison guards. As time goes by, the tide begins to turn against Germany.
慢慢的，这个形势 tide 开始 turn against Germany。turn against 意思就是某件事情或是某个人与某个人为敌。那课文这里的意思就是说，对德国来说，这个情势是越来越不妙。We can also say turn somebody against somebody or something. 意思就是使某个人和另一个人为敌。For example, my best friend turned my boyfriend against me, so we're no longer friends.
Oh, yeah, I certainly wouldn't be friends with them anymore.
And soon, there is news that the Russian army has invaded Poland and the Nazis are retreating.
They're retreating. When an army retreats, it goes back where it came from because it is losing a battle or a war. So the German army was retreating from Poland towards the end of the war because they weren't strong enough to fight their enemies. They had to run away. We could also say that they made their retreat from Poland. That is because retreat can be both a noun and a verb. Let's look at an example sentence for retreat. When we couldn't protect the castle any longer, the soldiers retreated to a safer location. I'm sorry, that should be when they couldn't protect the castle anymore. I've not been protecting any castles recently. I don't know about you. Okay, another similar word is withdraw. If an army withdraws its soldiers from another country, it tells those soldiers to come back. We can also withdraw money. So you can take money out of an ATM. When you do that, you're withdrawing the money.
Retreat 是动词，通常指的是军队的撤退。所以如果战争的一方快要输了，那通常他们就会撤到安全的地方。那我们除了用 retreat 来说军队撤退之外呢，我们也可以说是后退或者是退却的意思。You move away from someone or something. For example, the flood waters are slowly retreating. 意思就是那个水已经慢慢的退了。那例句说，当士兵们没有办法再防卫城堡的时候，他们就撤退到了一个比较安全的地方。
Okay, so Schindler frees his workers and gives every Jew some blue cloth to sell or make clothes. Okay, that cloth is probably very valuable. So as they don't have anything, that could help them get to a safer place, or they could use it they could sell it to get food. Okay, so that's the last good thing he does.
And Leon and his family have suffered terribly over the years, but thanks to their employer, the impossible became possible.
Exactly. Suffer. We saw that word suffer there. When someone suffers, they go through something very painful or difficult. So Leon and his family have suffered terribly during the Nazi occupation of Poland. They've had to live in terrible conditions. They were beaten and they didn't have enough food to eat. We could also say that they experienced much suffering. Suffering is the noun form of suffer. Suffer can also be a transitive verb or an intransitive verb, so it's up to you whether you add a noun afterwards. You can suffer abuse, for example, or you can just suffer for a long time. Both work. Also, we sometimes follow the word suffer with the preposition, from. So we suffer from a disease or we suffer from a condition. In this case, suffer means to have something unpleasant happen to you. So let's look at an example sentence for suffer. Alice was bullied in school and she suffered until she finally told someone what was happening to her.
Suffer 这里是动词，指的是受害或者是受苦。那课文里面呢，说 Leon 和他的他的家人在这段期间受了很多苦，受了很多的折磨。It can be physical or mental pain. So suffer 意思就是它可以当及物动词，也可以当不及物动词。当它当及物动词的时候呢，后面可以加一个 from。通常指的是罹患或者是经历一个不好的疾病。For example, my friend used to suffer from a serious depression. She had to see a therapist every week.
Yeah, that sounds like she was really suffering at that time. Okay, that's where we have to end the story. So Leon, he does survive. He actually meets Oskar Schindler later in his life, about 20, 30 years later. And Oskar Schindler remembers him. And they have, I think they remain friends for a long time in their life. So this story has a rather happy ending to it. Anyway, let's look at our For You chat question now. And then tomorrow we'll talk more about the themes behind the book.
For You chat.
Okay, our For You chat question for today is, have you ever received help from someone? What did they help you with? Okay, so remember, receive there is our getting verb. So has anybody ever given you help? Nikki, have you ever received help from someone?
All the time. So at school, I suck at computers. I suck at like Excels and stuff. So I always have to go to my classmates for help. So like, can you help me do this? Can you help me do this programming stuff?
Oh, okay, okay. So they really help you. Okay.
What about you? Have you ever?
I'm studying as well now, so I often ask people for help if I don't understand things. I don't ride on anyone's coattails, though. Do you know that expression? That's an idiom, ride on someone's coattails. That means when you basically use someone else's success to make you do better. So if Nikki gets really famous as a singer and then I hang around with her all the time because
it's like, I want to be your manager, agent
and
stuff.
So I'll be famous too because I get seen with famous Nikki. That's riding on coattails. And if you're getting your classmates to do all your work for you, you're kind of riding on their coattails. Okay, so you guys can talk about whether you've received help from someone. Have you ever ridden on someone's coattails? Or do you know someone who has? You guys talk about that now, and we'll see you again tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Vocabulary Review.
Survival. Some animals collect and store lots of food during summer to help with their survival through winter. Receive. Andy was really happy to receive a Nintendo Switch for his birthday. Portion. When Steve buys fast food, he always orders a portion of fries. Starve. Colin forgot to feed his fish for a week, so it starved to death. Retreat. The army lost too many men during the battle, so they had to retreat to safety. Suffer. After receiving treatment for a while, Kate was no longer suffering from her sore back.
以上节目是由活用空中美语制作，活用空中美语杂志，请洽询全国各大书店。如欲索取试听教材，请来电02-2364-4000 02-2364-4000，或上网查询，网址是 www.english4u.net www.english4u.net